Hey everyone, it's Louisa Munson from Feel Good Astrology. And boy, have I got a tearjerker of a feel good conversation for you. And when I say tearjerker, I don't want it to sound like it's maudlin or depressing. In fact, I think it's quite enlightening and uplifting. We are really honored to be delving into different chapters of my guest's life today. And this is a life like, you know, it could actually be a movie script from my perspective. My guest was born in the UK. He moved to Australia as a teen. He spent 33 years down under, and he's lived pretty much all over the world, in particular in parts of Africa and mainly in Southeast Asia. And he lives in Bali. He is a former health and safety environmental officer and specialist, an author of a book called Cause No Harm, which is rather brilliant. I can recommend that. He's also been a presenter at TEDx Bali. He is the founder of Heaven in Bali, which is a fantastically beautiful and serene retreat center, where he now guides people to consciously evolve and to look at their lives and look at the impact that they make. He's an activist for change. He values integrity, authenticity, and the whole human journey. As you listen in today, you'll notice that there's a real emphasis on the richness of the journey. He is a father, son, grandfather, husband, brother, friend, teacher. You know, he's all of those things wrapped into one. Now, before we get going, I just need to also preface the fact that we were under quite a lot of stress to record this today. It sounded like he had building work going on in the background. He had a fly that kept zooming around his face and landing. You know, it's fly season wherever you are in Bali, I guess. My computer suddenly collapsed. So this is recorded in 2 parts and stitched together. We didn't give up. That was the most important thing. I didn't kill off the green screen when I used my husband's computer. So later on, you'll see that the plant behind me with those lovely green leaves are twinkling bright blue later on. They are not, you know, interplanetary. They are just a green screen effect. So yeah, we persisted, and I'm really pleased of what's been put together. So it's my absolute immense pleasure to bring on my guest now. Yes, let's meet him. It's time to meet him. It's time to let him say a few words. So I'm introducing you to Mr. Rick Pursell from rickpurcell.com and Heaven in Bali. I hope you enjoy this. So it's my delight to bring Rick on now. Rick, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing very, very well. And I'm truly honored, Louisa, that you would invite me onto this show. So thank you.
The honor is all mine. It's great that you've agreed to it. I feel very touched by that. We are actually coming to you from 2 different places around the world. This is like an international, very international meetup. I'm in Portugal. It's 7 a.m. What time is it where you are, Rick?
It's 2 o'clock, according to the fly that keeps landing on my nose.
I was going to say, that's really typical of being in a hot country. It will be entering into Portuguese fly time very soon as the heat comes up. I really wanted to bring you on because I've known you for, well, quite a long time now. It's over 11 years.
Yes.
I think it was 11 years ago when we met. There's quite a few things about what I learned from you that are still really playing out in my life, and I'm really kind of grateful to you for them. But one of them is how I learned about integrity. And from my perspective, you're somebody that oozes integrity. And so I just wondered if you'd be content and happy to share your thoughts about it. And maybe let's start with, you know, when did you first come into when did you first realize your integral self, I guess, is probably the question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure that I could pinpoint any one particular time. But, you know, we've all been subject to untruths. And one of the biggest untruths that I was subject to in my 20s, and I think you know my story, that I was drafted into the Australian Army to go and fight in the war in Vietnam. Yeah. And the propaganda that we were told is that there are millions of Chinese on the Vietnamese border that are longing to come down to Australia, because I lived in Australia at the time. And you will be fighting them on the beaches of Bondi, Darwin, and Cottesloe. And being a new Australian and having adopted Australia as my country and becoming an Australian citizen, along with my British passport, I felt a sense of duty that, okay, I've adopted this country. It's way better than what I'd left. So perhaps duty I always found was one of the highest values is duty. It's a call, and that's what would bring people to line up to help or to go to war or whatever. So I followed the propaganda hook, line, and sinker. And 6 weeks into my tour of duty, I realized it's a load of BS. It was just lies, right? Nobody wanted to be there. The Vietnamese didn't want us there. The North Vietnamese didn't want us there. The Americans didn't want us there. The Aussies and New Zealanders didn't want to be there. And I think that really hit a chord with me, that I had volunteered for something. Well, I actually hadn't volunteered. I was given a choice, a little backstory on this. When I went to register on the first day in the army, I pleaded with the major. I said, listen, sir, you have to understand that I was brought up by two loving pacifist parents. And I am a pacifist. I've taken on that value. And I don't believe in war and I don't believe in violence. And here I'm a 20-year-old kid. And he's without hesitation, he said, son, that's not a problem. It's not a problem. You will just spend 2 years in jail. And my heart sank, because I just left. The process is by lottery. So your marble comes out with your name or your birth date on it, and you're called up, and everybody else doesn't. So all my mates, out of the 8 or 9 of us that were in a rock band and all new Australians from England, I was the only one that got called up. And so I imagined them now with my hair short back and sides instead of long. They're going down the beach, they're building their businesses, they're getting engaged, they're going to motor racing, all of that stuff, while I was there sitting in a place that I didn't really have much control over. And I had to make a decision in that time. He said, you're going to have to decide now, son. Right? So I said, okay, I'll go. And that was it. So I have to take full responsibility for that decision, because I could have chosen to rot in a stinking jail for 2 years. But I ask you, what 20-year-old kid wants to do that? So sorry, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of older people that would also make the same decision as you. So even though I can see that a 20-year-old is never going to agree to do that willingly, I think actually most people would have made the same decision as you.
Well, that's consoling, although I reconciled that a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that the idea of war is somebody puts a gun against your head, basically, or from a trench. This major, this officer, was virtually putting a gun against my head. Yeah. And in that moment, I forgo my personal value of integrity, which is what I'd been brought up in, along with pacifism and these beautiful heart-centered values that my parents passed on to us. In that moment, my concern was much more for my immediate future than it was for the values that I'd been led to follow for 20 years. And I think that was the catalyst for me about integrity and values. And then it was to prove 6 weeks later that it was all based on a lie anyway. So that was, if there was a moment, that would have been it.
Yeah. I can. I mean, I guess I was raised in a time when that hasn't needed to be something I've thought about. You know, when I look at my peers from my age group, they've only enlisted in the army if they've chosen to. They've not felt like there was a need to do that. And so, what happened next? How did you get yourself out of that? Did you have to do your full tour, or?
Yeah, I did 2 years. 1 year of a tour of duty in the Vietnam War, which was horrific, obviously, and came back a very, very broken, very disillusioned, broken man. With everything that I stood for had been dismantled. Witnessing and participating in man's inhumanity to man, to the insanity of war, and having received a Dear John letter from my wife at the time, who we'd spent 5 weeks with on honeymoon, and she just disappeared from my life. Said she'd gone off with somebody else. And to this day, I never saw her again. She just disappeared. And that night, with all of the trauma of war and the insanity of it and getting this letter, I walked out of my tent, put my rifle against the butt of the rifle against the ground, the barrel against my head, and pressed the first pressure on the trigger of the gun with the intention of blowing my misery out. I couldn't see any way out of this insanity and this trauma and this pain and suffering. And it was, there was a clearing, and a mate of mine came out of the tent to take a pee and saw me sitting there, and as calm as a cucumber, just sat opposite me and looked me in the eye and said, "How long have you been here?" And I, through my sobbing and pain, about 20 minutes, right? And without hesitation, he leant over, took the rifle off me, ejected the bullet, put it down beside him. He said, "Purcell, I've known you for 9 months. You've been our section commander. You've kept us alive. You're decisive. You are certain about what is the right course of action to do. If you were going to do this, you'd have done it 20 minutes ago." And he was right. I was sitting on the fence. And we got up, we hugged each other, we cried, we yelled, we cursed the Americans, we cursed the Australians, we cursed the Viet Cong, cursed everybody, not taking any responsibility for having created this scenario in the first place. I wasn't to learn that until years later. And managed to drag myself through 3 more months of pain and trauma, and went back, as I say, a very broken man. But that's all gone now. That's all moved on from that, all released, all healed, to find great meaning in life and great purpose and fulfillment.
Wow.
You asked the question.
Yeah, I did. I did. And you're right. I did know the story, but of course I heard it 11 years ago, and it felt different listening to it this time. Very different. I'm sorry. So what I know about you is that you're somebody who seems really healed, and I utterly believe you when you say that. How did you get onto that path of healing? What happened, what was your next big kind of breakthrough? Where do you go from being broken and having your whole worldview taken apart? How do you move beyond that? What steps did you take? Or was it something inside yourself saying, I can do this, I can do this? I mean, what resident thought did you have that kept you going to bring about this breakthrough?
My dad passed away when I was 26. And he said to me, he saw the mess that I was in. And he came to me after about a week or so and said, son, we've really missed you. For 2 years, we've been on edge about what would happen to you. And knowing, having been through the war themselves in England, what it's like to endure that and the fear that goes associated with it. And he said, we've really missed you, but I can see how painful your life is at the moment. You've always talked about going back to England. I was a petrol head at those days. I was racing Mini Coopers. And he said, you've always talked about going back to England, and said, you told me when you were 11 years of age that one day you're going to go to Monaco and watch the Monte Carlo Grand Prix. Monaco Grand Prix. And he said, maybe this is the time to do that, right? It was such an unselfish gesture on his part. He said, you've got money, you've been away, you don't have a job to come back to. Maybe this is the time to go and heal. And I was flabbergasted by his caring that, parents would want to hang on to their kids, especially when they're traumatized like that. They would want to protect them. And he knew I was an adventurer. I got my adventuresome spirit from him and Mum. And he made that suggestion. And within a few weeks, I was on a plane to England and stayed in London for 5 or 6 months, and then bought myself a VW combi wagon, orange, painted with psychedelic colors and flowers and kangaroos on it. It was now it's about 1970, I think. So wow. The hippie era was full on, and I was going to regrow my hair and become a hippie and just travel around Europe. And I didn't know for how long. But as it transpired, I went back to Cornwall from the Midlands. I was born in Wolverhampton, raised on a farm in there, and I had been back there and relived some of my childhood, and then decided to go to Cornwall, where we would go once a year to see the seaside. That's the only time, once a year, as a family and as kids, get the train from Wolverhampton to London across to Penzance. And it was a boy's dream of a journey. But this time I drove in the Volkswagen Combi, and I drove all the way to Land's End and parked there. And it was autumn. So there weren't many tourists there, and the weather was changing. And virtually as soon as I got there and got settled in, I started getting these flashbacks, these horrific flashbacks of my entire journey in Vietnam. All of the things that I'd contributed to and witnessed, all of the pain, all of the sorrow, it was all coming out. You have to remember, at this stage, I'd had no religious upbringing. My parents, when 3 of us boys, when we're old enough, they said, son, when you're old enough, you choose your path. This is not our decision for you. When you're old enough, you make up your own mind, which was a wonderful gift, because in later years, it allowed me to explore Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Christian mysticism, Sufism. But prior to that, I'd had no religious upbringing and zero spiritual experiences certainly that I was aware of, none at all. So all of a sudden, I'm going through all these massive flashbacks and pain and screaming, crying uncontrollably, swearing, throwing rocks at seagulls and never hitting them, kicking the tires. All this anger was bursting forth. And then there would be moments of stillness, moments of clarity, where I'd go into the Volkswagen and I would be writing in my journal the most exquisite poetry. Now, I've never been into poetry ever since I was forced to read Chaucer's Tales and a few other things at school in England. but these words were just flowing through me from a place I could never, ever discern. And those moments of the silence and stillness, they might last an hour, and then the flashbacks would come up. And it went like that for 3 to 4 days. A couple of times I thought, is this going to be my life now? Am I going to be regurgitating this pain and trauma for the rest of my life, and then have momentary periods of quiet and stillness? And a couple of times I looked over the side and said, maybe I'd be better off on those rocks down there. But something was guiding me, and it was only in later years that I understood fully that I was being guided through this process. And on the fifth morning, I woke up on my bunk in the combi. I had no curtains on it. The sun was just coming through the windows. I looked up at the roof lining and realized it's all gone. It had moved from the unconscious to the conscious. And I spent about 4 hours reliving my entire journey in the Vietnam War, getting the letter, all of the trauma, and there was not an ounce of pain, not an ounce of tears. I was just looking at it as if it was a movie, and I was a witness to it, but not engaged in it. And that was my huge first wake-up call. I realized that I'm not this pain and trauma. I'm merely the witness to it. And that this silence, this stillness, this awareness, this what I know now as consciousness, is there within me. And it was just juxtapositioning itself. Here's your pain, here's your consciousness, here's your pain, here's your consciousness. And of course, the realization that that must be who I am, because while the consciousness was fleeting, it was always there to come back to and tap into. So that was my first big slap around the chops with the baseball bat that the universe gave me. It was a very beautiful experience. And to this day, years and years later, I've never had any problem. I've been back to Vietnam 5 times. I actually walked back into an ex-Vietnam Viet Cong village and befriended the people who were supposedly my enemy, but were in fact brothers and sisters. And I had this amazing 5-hour, it was a reunion from the heart. And since I've coached Vietnam vets and encouraged them to go back and to purge the demons. So I look back now on the Vietnam experience, and it was catalytic for me. I don't think I'd be doing the work and being the person that I am today had I not had that experience. So given the choice of going back and changing all of that, I think I would leave it as it is. If this is the result that comes from it, then there's no reason to change that. So it was a very, very powerful time in my life. And there you have it.
By the way, I didn't know that you were an aspiring pop star. That's really cool.
Well, we had a long way to go. But yeah, there were a bunch of us English guys, and we could put on Liverpudlian accents. Me and John Lennon used to go to different schools together. And our greatest fear was to go to a nightclub and somebody from work would be there, because we got leather jackets and cut the sleeves off, and we had denim shirts and winkle pickers, the whole lot, and this long hair. And we would just put on this phony Liverpool accents, right? And our greatest fear was that somebody would come from work and say, "Oh, hi, Rick, how you doing?" And I'd have to answer them while I was chatting up some girl or something like that. So anyway.
So didn't quite fulfill your desire to be a pop star. But how has your desire to kind of perform and be creative, how has that come about over these years?
Musically, music's been a huge part of my life, but I've been a frustrated musician all my life. I've bought guitars and sold them, drum kits, not kits, but drums and flutes and flutes made in the Andes, and never really mastered any of them. The only thing I did was I could play the blues harmonica. And haven't done that for years. And I was a lead singer, and I don't sing anymore. But music has been a very big part of my life. But I did take the stage a few years ago and did a TED Talk.
Wow!
And that was on my book, Cause No Harm. Mm-hmm. So that for me was a feather in my cap, because as a young teenager growing up in Australia, moving to Australia, I had these two profoundly buck teeth sticking out. And prior to orthodontal treatment, I had these great big fangs that hang out. And I was so self-conscious, and had a teacher at my new Australian school that would force me to stand up and read so that she and the rest of the class could make fun of me. She just got, any time I was reading, Purcell, you stand up, and they would just laugh their heads off with my English accent. So I introverted on that, became very shy and withdrawn and insular. So it was quite something to be able to overcome that, and sing in front of people, and then later on do a TED Talk. So
wow,
they're all good lessons. Everybody that's come into my life, whether they're labeled good or bad, has been a tremendous influence, sometimes showing me what I don't want, and that I don't want to become, and other times thinking I could adopt those values or that characteristic or that quality or that skill or whatever. So it's been an amazing journey so far.
Yeah, and there's so much more. Cause No Harm, then. That's a book that I bought from you because I was very fascinated by it. Tell me what transpired for you to bring that out, because I'm sure there's a bit of a backstory to that as well, isn't there?
There is. For years, I worked as an occupational health, safety and environmental specialist and an advisor to big companies. And in the process of seeing how we could, our whole purpose as an advisor is to try and reduce the amount of losses, whether there be physical injuries, deaths, environmental spills, accidents of any name. And we seemed to have got to a plateau where it just leveled off and you couldn't get any further. Then behavioral science came along and gave us another shot in the arm, where we could use, by looking at behaviors and what is causing people to take at-risk behaviors, where a boss or a supervisor is under the hammer to get a job or project completed, and he's pushing that down into his workforce, then those guys that are on the tools are going to take risks to please the next boss. So realize after that, going down to another level, it flattened out. That caused me to look at, well, where do we go from here? What is the next paradigm that we could address to reduce these debilitating illnesses and accidents and deaths and environmental spills? And it made me look at what is driving the behaviors, what's behind the behaviors. If people are taking at-risk behaviors, what's behind that? Yeah. And what unfolded was the process, a very observable process, that we have 5 perceptions plus a 6th sense of intuition. And what we perceive in our immediate world and the world around us, we start to notice things about it. We hear them, we taste them, we smell them, we touch them. And we form from those perceptions, we form a perspective. That is, this is how I see it. This is my point of view. This is my viewpoint. And the more we reinforce that perspective, it becomes a belief. I believe this. This is my belief. So we take ownership from perceptions to perspective to beliefs. And what comes out of beliefs are our behaviors. Our behaviors, from whatever we believe, our behaviors will emanate and be dramatized. And we see this so observably in life. Why do these people do this? Why do they behave this way? Right?
Yes.
Whether it be their religious belief or their upbringing or peer group pressure, whatever it is. So that's what I think I have to write about this and apply this into my work game to try to start reducing these losses. And I wrote the book. It's on Amazon, and then I was invited over a 4-year period to get this principle into a major company in Singapore. And we won some wonderful accolades and awards as a result of it. So I tested it in the most extreme situation in a corporation.
Yes.
It's since gone into a couple of schools, and a few friends of mine have used it. It's a principle I use in my life as a core value: cause no harm. Yeah. And it really, the origins are from Hippocrates, who said, "Do no harm." And I looked at that and said, if you're about to do something, you're too close to it. Yeah. So cause no harm gives us an opportunity to be still for a moment and consider what actions would my result in, right? So I think about how could this cause harm, and it could cause harm to myself, to others, to machinery and equipment, to the immediate environment in which we live, work, and play, to the planet as a whole. And the main one that was my focus, and it was taken from the Hopi Indian elders, what effect would it have 7 generations ahead? Yeah. Not a 4-year term in politics, but 7 generations ahead. And that changed my whole outlook, right? Practicing what I preached and practicing in my work environment. So that was a lovely journey, that one.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, if you think about cause no harm, I mean, it's also a fitting tribute to your parents as well, who, as you say, are very kind, gentle pacifists. You know, it would appear that you follow right in their footsteps. And I love the idea that we are raised on the shoulders of giants. You had some great parents, and you were able to become an even greater giant for your children to step onto in their own way as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a lovely mention there, because we really, what we've inherited can be built upon, and we can pass this on to our own children, so that each generation has a foundational support, and they can improve upon it if they choose to make a better life for themselves and for humanity. So it's they were very powerful values that my parents had, and very simple, very humble beginnings. We lived on a remote farm in England with no electricity, no water. Had to ride a bike to school, summer, spring, or winter. So, and they were adventurers, and they finally packed up and moved to Australia. So I know, and there's probably not a day goes by when I don't pay homage to both my parents.
Wow. And you too have also moved around. I mean, you've lived in some cool places, haven't you? Tell us where you've lived and how that's influenced your consciousness.
Well, I've traveled to 33 countries and still counting.
Wow.
but I've lived in 8 of them. And they were diversified from Brunei, which is a very strict Muslim country, to West Africa, Middle East, spent some time in Israel on a project, Singapore, Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, some time in China. It's been an amazing journey, and each one of those places added value to my life and added more quality to my life, I think. And I could take away the philosophy, the belief systems, and engage and immerse myself in them. Still a lot of places I want to go to. So.
Well, there's a place for you in Portugal should you want to come and visit, for sure.
Yes, please. Be there in the drop of a hat.
That sounds great. So it's fascinating because, you know, when we started this conversation, I was talking about deep integrity, and it's funny that as you went through your life, you found yourself in a job that is about making people more responsible, and taking real integrity over the safety of people, but also, like you say, the safety of the environment, the things that you're interacting with, you know, taking into account everything. And I really love your inclusion of the idea of the 7 generations, because I think if we're not looking that far into the future, we're really missing a trick. You know, we really do need to assess our behaviors and our intentions, you know,
Yes.
in that way. I think it's lovely.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on at the moment in terms of integrity? Like, as we're recording this, it's 2021, and it would appear, if you follow mainstream news, it would
Which I
appear that
don't.
well, that's very wise, actually. But if ever you fall into like a moment of it, it kind of tries to capture you, and talk about something that's going on worldwide at the moment. And instinctively, I'm thinking, well, there's a huge load of, you know, lack of integrity here. You have people saying this is what you need to do and not doing it. They have rules that make no sense. And how do people? I guess I'm looking at this from a couple of perspectives. Like, how do people who have integrity stay in integrity, even though the rest of the world seems to be moving away from it? How do you? My first question is, how do you keep in integrity?
Yes.
You know, what is our responsibility as light workers? And then the next part of my question is, how can people who have become aware of the lack of integrity around them, how can they find themselves in integrity when it's not something that's been encouraged? You know, it would appear that if somebody was to drop their belief systems right now, that their whole world would collapse. There's not much in it for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
a bit of a long, baggy question there.
Good.
I'm happy to dive right in.
Good question. And just keep me on track if I wander off a bit.
No, you need to keep me on
track. Let's first define integrity. My idea of integrity is honesty, trustworthy, faithfulness, openness, reliable. And when you say you're going to do it, you do it.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a core value of mine. It was a core value of my parents, and it's a core value of mine. And we can know these intellectually and sprout them off endlessly, or we can embody and live them. And that's that's what I've endeavored to do in my life, to embody. If I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it, unless there's a legitimate reason why it can't be done. All right. I'm raising twin girls now. They're 12 now. If I ever promise to do something, I'll always make sure. I might need reminding now and again because of a busy life, but I'll always come good with the goods. And I instill that with them and say, look, if you say you're going to do something, integrity is following through with it.
Yeah.
So we have to embody and live these things on a day by day, moment by moment basis. If we're going to say this is a value of mine, then you have to embody it, be it, live it. And it must be demonstrable. You can't just say it. You've got to show by example that you are living by this value of integrity, so that any time there is an out integrity scenario that comes along, that maybe there's an opportunity to make some money at the expense of somebody else. So then I will make it very, very clear that yes, it would be nice to have that money, but no, I won't. I will not violate my personal integrity. To a point where now, it might sound a bit extremism, but and I believe it, but I won't know until the time comes to test it. Right? But my belief is my value is my integrity is more important than my immediate life. So if I found myself into a scenario where I was asked to take the life of somebody, right? For a hypothetical case, somebody's got a gun against my head, puts this gun in my hand and says, I want you to kill that person. I would just turn around to them and say, go ahead, pull the trigger. Right? Because my integrity is more important than my immediate life. I know this meat body would die. It would stop breathing. But that which animates this body is life itself. Yeah. So that's why I followed integrity, and you're aware and you've recognized it. The only way you would recognize it in me is if you have it in yourself. So you carry the same value in your heart. The second part of the question is, when you're surrounded by out integrity, how do you maintain it? Again, it's a belief system, isn't it? Right? What we believe, if you believe that integrity is one of my highest values, if I believe it, then my behavior will emanate from that belief. If I'm wishy-washy about it or prepared to throw it away, then my behavior would change completely. So technically, I could be in a room full of arms dealers and drug dealers, all trying to get me to come along and play their game. And I would just, one, I wouldn't put myself in that scenario. And two, if I did find myself, I'd just say, I'm not interested, goodbye.
Yeah.
And, fear of consequences is one of the biggest fears we have. We don't do something, or we go off the rails because we fear the consequences of what will happen if I am truthful, if I'm honest, or if I am dishonest. It works both ways. So a while back, we had a president of America on television in front of millions of people say, I did not have sexual relationships with that woman, right? Lying through his teeth. The fear of consequences, of being adored by lots of people, by being the president of the USA, by being this and that, and suddenly this is gone. The consequences were unapproachable. So the integrity says, I'll tell a lie here, right? Yeah. It's easier to do that. And now you've sold your soul out. Now we can always backtrack on it. And next day he'd come back on television and say, people, I want you to know this is the truth. And his following would probably go out the roof because of that honesty. Instead, he lived and perpetrated that lie for a long time. And look how many other lies were being fed. People that are just not telling the truth. Because they are fearing the consequences. And it's all driven by fear. And we know fear comes from the ego. It's the principal driver of the human ego is fear. So that tells you where they're coming from.
Yes,
so
I go on.
Yeah, I sincerely hope that I can maintain these values and enhance them more as my children and the people that I come in contact with, I could lead by example.
Yeah. Yes,
you were going to say.
Well, I want to say something else now from what you've just said. So, like from what you've just said, you're maintaining your integrity, and it's your intention to keep to your integrity to the best of your ability for the rest of your life. And you're setting that as a standard for your daughters and for anyone that comes into contact with you. And so that is creating a world, a seed point in the world that will continue the integrity going for at least another 7 generations. You're giving people the choice to, follow your example or learn that it's quite a nice way to be. The other thing I was coming to is when you were talking about that specific president, is there is, and I've noticed it in children, and I remember myself being one of those children that maybe told a few lies, or probably more than that, though. I still do remember having quite a bit of integrity and getting told off for being truthful about things. But once you have a lie, you then have to, you have a secret life that emerges. And I think from that first lie comes shame, and then blame and guilt and anger. It sows so much, and you have to tell more and more lies to keep that one lie protected. And it seems to have a life of its own. And so one of the characteristics of you, this is what I'm unpicking, is what does it mean to be in integrity? I guess one of the things is that if you do have any darknesses, it's important that you're able to talk about them and be honest about them, because if there are any darknesses, you have to protect them with a series of lies. So I guess one sort of deep characteristic of people who are in integrity, they must have forgiven themselves for having not had integrity in the past.
Yes.
Because you have to forgive yourself to be able to not feel the shame and move beyond that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And just to expand that, I believe that we came into these incarnations to experience, just to experience. That's all we're doing. And that experience could be labeled good or bad.
Yeah.
Right? Because in a state of oneness, there is nothing to experience because there's no relativity. There's no opposite. There's no duality in a state of oneness. There is only one. And in order to experience life and experience the duality, which we live in now, hot and cold, day and night, masculine and feminine, we will, from time to time, have experiences that would be considered perhaps immoral, out of ethics, out of integrity, whatever it is, just so we can experience it. And some people will perpetrate that for an entire lifetime. They can spend a life of crime and violence and that. Other people will say, I don't think I'd make that choice again. So all we've done is made a choice. Now, society will judge us. We will judge ourselves. But in this wholeness state, there is no judgment. It was just an experience. Now, that doesn't condone bad behavior, evil behavior, or whatever. It doesn't make it right. But from the bigger perspective, All we're doing is experiencing. So I look back now on my life and said, I've done some pretty crazy things in my life, as we all have. I've told some untruths. I've spun some stories. I've had some dark times in my life. And I've had all the other side as well. For me, when people ask me, what's the definition of spirituality? And I say, just being authentic, 100% authentic, being real, being true, being honest, right? Being vulnerable, being scared. And when you can express those through the portal of courage, right, which it takes to be courageous, it takes courage to forgive ourselves and other people. It takes courage to be humble. All of those values, they're hard values, they will keep us on the right track. And there's behaviors in the past I've had, especially in my youth, that I would never, ever entertain again. I've been there. I've done that. I know what it felt like. I know the guilt associated with it and the story. And that doesn't appeal to me at all now. So that's part of the learning process. How do you know what you want until you've experienced what you don't want?
Yeah.
And that could be in movies, in books, a conversation, a job, a person, a place, a meal, whatever. So we have to have this duality, and we experience what we don't want in order to know what we do want. So it plays out as just a big, beautiful game. There shouldn't be any involved in it. Responsibility needs to come in for sure. But we don't want to be carrying this rucksack full of rocks filled with the burden of guilt and blame and shame and regret, because that doesn't do anybody any good, in particular ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I love that. I quite like the work of Brad Blanton. Have you come across him? He wrote a book called Radical Honesty.
Sorry, who is it?
Brad Blanton. He's an American.
No.
Brad Blanton, Blanton, and he talks about radical honesty, being honest, and then sticking around to clear up the mess. And I think that's the defining factor, because a lot of people think that if you're honest about something, that you might be being cruel. You know, people have spoken about white lies and, you know, why we might sugar the truth a little bit. And all of these phrases like sugaring the truth, I mean, that's us justifying not being truthful. And so when my husband and I read his book together, we put ourselves through some of his exercises, and they were pretty tough, actually. We had to come clean if we'd actually lied to each other, and we'd both told a lie to each other before as we were getting together, because we felt embarrassed about something of our past. And then we had to sort of share information about our sexual partners, what we'd done with them, and really private stuff that people tend to feel embarrassed by. And one of his whole exercise, and this comes from years of psychological practice, you know, working with clients and stuff. And he worked out that the problem that most people suffer from is they feel ashamed, and then they spend their life trying to make up for it. And they'll lie to be liked more, be more popular, or whatever, so that people never really find out who they really are. You know, it's about complete vulnerability. And there's this amazing video on YouTube of when he tried to become a senator in America. And so he was running for a position, and his own team were being interviewed. And of course, they're all well trained in his methodology. And his team were being interviewed, and they were being asked, would you vote for Brad? And they said, no, absolutely not. And when he was grilled by the other team, you know, who knew he was going to be honest. And so interviewers were saying, have you ever done drugs? Have you ever been unfaithful? Have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? And he's like, yeah, I did drugs back in the day. This is what I did. Have you been unfaithful? Yes, I've been unfaithful to all my partners apart from my, you know. And it went on, and it really built this picture of him. And they used it to kind of slam him down, when in fact, there was something really refreshing about somebody who doesn't feel vulnerable. They know themselves and their truth. They're absolutely authentic, and nobody can really take that from you. Once you've got that, it's there forever.
Yes. Yeah.
And he's a bit of a sort of like punk philosopher, I guess. And what I see from you is yours is grounded in business and family and community. Like, I think from my experience of you, Rick, your integrity has grown, but in a way that has worked for everybody's good. I can see that Brad's might not always work because it really ruffles feathers.
Yeah. It's very interesting. There's a proviso on there as well, is that how much truth can a person take? I mean, this might sound like sugarcoating it. I don't like to. I like to try and gauge where the entry level is for people's awareness.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're talking up here and they're here, you're going to lose them anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
So, what level of, you don't have to tell an untruth, but how much can you trickle through there that they can grasp and build upon? So perhaps there's a discernment that comes in there where we say, okay, what do I think this person's level of understanding and comprehension might be, that I could pass on this piece of information, right? Yeah. So that's using discernment. But the thing for me is that I've adopted over the years is I really don't give a damn what people think about me. And the truth is, I don't know what they think about me. I only know what I think they're thinking about me.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a story I'm making up in my mind.
Yeah.
So when we can really let go of not caring what people think about us, now we can be totally honest and authentic and display ourselves, make a fool of ourselves, be silly, do anything we like.
Yeah.
And that's who we are. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, that's your problem.
Yeah, you're right. Totally. That completely resonates. Obviously, we're both raising children, aren't we? And yes. There are some things that I withhold from my children, so I'm not telling them, though I'd be very happy to share with them if they ever ask. Yes. So yeah, I guess that's discernment, and I'm really pleased that you were able to put that label on, because sometimes I do wonder how honest. I mean, I always tell them the truth, or I say always. It's dangerous to say that, because there might be an instance where I say, say something out of character and then go back to it later and clear it off. But yes, it's helpful to see that aspect of withholding as a moment of being discerning. I like that.
Yes.
I was going to ask you something, but in my own waffly response to you, I lost the question. What was it? Oh, never mind. It will come back to me. Go on, carry on.
It will. What would you like me to carry on about with my waffling?
I don't know. Maybe we're done on the truth for now. Actually, no. I know what I was going to talk to you about now. The ethical dilemma of being aware of certain things going on in the world and talking about it to people or sharing stuff with people. For instance, I've recently been considering the fact that we don't know enough about what's going on in our bodies, and that there might be a shedding issue with people who've just been newly vaccinated in 2021, and the implications of socializing with them, and the conversations that I might want to have with people that I love who've chosen to vaccinate, and when is the right time. At the moment, I'm kind of living in this space of desperately wanting to open up to them and say, look, I found this out and this is a bit worrying and I'd love to talk to you about it. But knowing that could very well bring about a hurt response in them or an upset response in them. And so it's like, how do you manage the tension of that? For now, I'm going with why call something, just hold the tension of it and do things as they arise, I guess, when I need to approach it, then deal with it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the latter statement was the true one. I often say, I'll deal with that when it comes along.
Okay.
Right? Rather than putting myself in the future, creating a what-if scenario that hasn't occurred yet. And I had a train of thought there. Using there's a principle of, it might sound controversial and against cause no harm, but there is a situation where we should never be afraid to hurt another in a just cause.
Okay.
Right? And I've counseled so many people, particularly with women, and they want to exit a relationship, or they've exited it, or whatever it is. And it comes down to intuition, that they have not trusted their intuition. And I've said to them on more than one occasion, can you just go back and tell me when you truly felt this person wasn't the right one for you? And they said, one said, about 6 weeks before we got married. And you've been married for how long? 8 years now. So you've been living with this lie for 8 years, right?
Yeah.
So how this principle is never be afraid to hurt another in a just cause is that if that's 6 weeks before you're getting married, and you maybe already bought the dress and all the arrangements and the honeymoon's all been paid for, but that's going to cause some harm. There's going to be some pain on that partner. But that if you continue it on 8 years, and then he or she can just say, well, when did you first feel like this? And you cough it up, the truth. About 6 weeks before we got married. Well, thank you for wasting my life. Right?
Yeah.
So we need to be discreet and discerning as to about, I'm not doing this to harm somebody out or being vindictive. I'm doing this to protect them so that the harm is reduced to as low as reasonably practicable. So that's one aspect. So that ties in with truth and discernment and trusting our intuition and all of those things. And we are also recognizing what is the entry point. With kids, we have to speak at their level of comprehension. Yes, they're infinite beings, but they're also having a very human child experience. So we can't just dump our years of knowledge and awareness on them, which will just leave them flummoxed. They'll be more confused. Right? Yeah. So it's a matter of using our discernment. How much honesty and truthfulness can this person accept? Right? I don't have to tell an untruth, but how much can I feed them?
Yeah.
And you just test the waters with some statement and watch and see if the eyes roll back, you've lost them. So now you go on to another subject. And I'm often reminded, I bummed around Europe for 2 years as a hippie, sometimes with no money. I didn't get to my mate stage where he would sell his blood weekly just to get a cup of tea and a biscuit. He was very anemic in the end, and I managed to talk him out of it. But there were times, one particular time I slept on a park bench with newspapers over my head and sitting on my rucksack, unable to afford lodgings for the night. I never wrote back. Those were the days when you had aerogram letters and long letters. I never ever wrote back and told my dad that, right? Because I know they would only get worried and concerned. And I'm foisting that concern on them by what I'm saying. I'm being honest, right? But look at the effect it's going to have. Look at the concern they would have. And they would want to say, come on, son, you need to come back. We're worried about you. Do we really need to foist that on them? So I would, it's called good roads, good weather. The food in Italy is fantastic. The people, you know how to keep an Italian quiet? You tie their arms behind their back because they can't speak without the hands. And I would joke, I'd call this a thing about him, right? Good roads, good weather, When I got home, I said, and when Dad sat me down and said, tell me about your story, then I would tell him right there and then, this is what happened. But I don't want to cause people unnecessary disturbance or mental trauma or whatever. Because for what? It's not that important. It's not life-threatening to them. So again, discerning what level of truth are we going to give, or what volume of truth are we going to impart with the recipient. And when we trust our heart and trust our intuition and trust our discernment, we'll know when to back off and when to pour the coals on.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've explored this quite well for today. I'm sure
it's been wonderful.
I'm sure all these themes are going to come up again in other chats, because I've committed, and we've committed to talking once a week, haven't we? Which I'm really excited about. If somebody wanted to contact you, if somebody wanted to learn more about Cause No Harm, or wanted to engage you in some coaching, what's the best way for people to reach out to you, Rick?
It would probably be through my website, which is on the ticker at the moment, but info@rickpurcell.com will get to me by email. And there's quite a bit of free stuff on the website. There's some stuff about Cause No Harm and some free ebooks there. So welcome to help themselves to those.
Wow, that's very generous. If you could leave people today with one thought that might help them in their day or their week or their month or the rest of their life, what would that be?
Sorry, what was the question?
If there was one last thought that you wanted to leave with people today.
A last thought.
Yeah.
My religious background was consists of watching The Life of Brian for 21 times. So my last thought would be, always look on the bright side of life.
Fantastic.
That's it. That's it.
That's perfect. I thought you were going to say, he's not the Messiah. Very naughty boy.
That's right.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
It's been really wonderful. It's heartwarming. And thank you again for the invite and for your great questions, and look forward to doing some more.
Yeah, definitely. Count on it.
Good.
Thank you so much. And thank you to you guys. Wow. It's taken me a long time to come back and sum up, my thoughts from this morning. I blubbed, as you probably noticed on the recording. I was really moved by it. And, over breakfast when I was chatting with my husband, I blubbed again. Isn't it interesting how you know a little bit about somebody already, and then when you hear their story again, it affects you in a new and even more profound way. And I guess we've known each other for 11 years. So, both of us, in our own context, have continued to evolve. So I guess his story has evolved and mine has as well. So I hope you take something from that. I hope you found that inspiring. Or, I love one of the things that really made me think I must collaborate with Rick, was the fact that when I was there 11 years ago, he was really, he always said, it's important to be your word. If you say you're going to do something, you should do it. And I remember actually we were doing some sessions together, and 5 of them went really smoothly, and one of them I was late for, quite considerably late. And he didn't hesitate to say, you know what, you said you were going to be here. It's important that you're here. And it was embarrassing, but I really needed to hear that. And it doesn't matter what excuses I came up with. I realized, there is a time to show up. And that's what I've really learned from Rick. And I'm really grateful to him. And that plays out again and again and again and again. When you realize something about your pattern that's not quite right, that's not in integrity with who you are, it's time to change. And in fact, during that time that I was there, I realized that my integrity level was changing quite rapidly. So yeah, it's a lesson that stuck with me. It's such a simple one, but it stuck with me. If you've really enjoyed this, and I'm sure you have, then please do subscribe to my channel. Also check out Rick's. Like I've said, I put all the links below. But know this, we've enjoyed chatting so much that this is going to be a weekly thing. It might not be, an hour long, video. We're likely to just do little snippets and snatch some time together, to just chat, but we're committed to keeping this conversation going. So if there's something you want to ask Rick about, a topic heading that you would love to explore, then just send us a message, let us know, and we will do these step by step over the coming weeks and months. In my mind, he is absolutely dedicated to the evolution of humanity, and I'm 100% there with him. So I'm really keen to see where this goes to. So yeah, I just wanted to leave that with you, that this will become a really common theme. We're going to be exploring so much together, and for that I'm so very full of gratitude. Anyway, I better leave because I'm going to blub soon. But anyway, thank you so much for your attention, for your nice thoughts, for your comments, for your shares, for your likes. And I really look forward to connecting with you soon. Bye for now.